China is demonstrating its diplomatic might, hosting a flurry of events that have attracted dozens of world leaders in recent days. The latest arrival in Beijing is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. North Korean state media confirmed Kim's arrival, showing his daughter, Kim Ju-ai, accompanying him. Kim is making a rare trip outside his borders to attend a military parade on Wednesday. Meanwhile, President Xi Jinping welcomed Russia's President Vladimir Putin at his residence, where the leaders held bilateral talks and praised their growing partnership. The talks followed a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which brought together dozens of countries aligned with China. Russia says the two countries agreed on a deal to build a second major gas pipeline to China and visa-free travel for Russian citizens. Here's a look at how Xi and Putin have been strengthening their partnership in the face of Western criticism.
A partnership of equals? Chinese President Xi Jinping was the guest of honor during a state visit in Moscow earlier this year. His host, Vladimir Putin, eager to please. A sign of enduring friendship in defiance of the West. In 2022, on the eve of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian and Chinese leaders declared a partnership without limits. That was soon put to the test when the U.S. and European Union piled sanctions on Moscow to curb its ability to wage war. Europe also tried to wean itself from Russian oil and gas. Moscow adjusted by shifting its exports elsewhere, especially to China. Trade between the two countries has risen sharply, from $130 billion in 2021 to $190 billion in 2022. It again increased to $240 billion in 2023 and $245 billion last year. Chinese companies have in some cases taken over and rebranded factories and showrooms Western companies had abandoned in Russia. Russia was able to keep its factories open and its economy going, trading survival for ever more dependence on Chinese technology and investment. China gained a hedge against threatened tariffs from the U.S., diversifying its markets and developing a parallel trading network. Standing by while its Russian partner wages war in Ukraine, China has called for restraint. But it's also watched the global reaction to Russian aggression. Beijing has had the chance to game out its own options should it invade Taiwan. Russia has suffered staggering losses of soldiers and materiel in the Ukraine war. With the Russian military overextended and its economy weak, China has emerged as the stronger senior partner. But Xi Jinping still needs Vladimir Putin as a key part of his military and economic strategy against the West.
Well, I'm joined now by Mikhail Alexseev. He's a professor at San Diego State University. He's a leading expert on Russia and the political dynamics that are shaping Eurasia today. Professor, it's good to have you with us. What are the main goals that Russia and China are pursuing through their partnership?
Well, the principal goal is to demonstrate that Russia and China can present an alternative to the United States-led world order. It is part of demonstrating the realignment of great powers. We often call it systemic transformations in the international system. And the irony of it is that this is happening at the time of the celebrations of China's victory in World War II, of the ending of World War II, which actually paved the way for the kind of international order where the types of conflict like World War I and World War II would be impossible or unthinkable. But this realignment actually means that we're going back to the pre-World War II order.
And I know that optics are important, and we've seen that this week, certainly in China. I'm wondering, do Presidents Putin and President Xi, do they really see eye to eye, or is there an imbalance in this relationship?
Yes, there's always, and for a long time has been an imbalance in this relationship. You know, I studied Chinese migration and cross-border issues in the Russian Far East for a long time. And one of the demonstrations of that unevenness comes from some of the border crossings where you see a huge Chinese portal and a very tiny Russian portal. I mean, the contrast in size is almost comedic, and that does illustrate the difference between the say economic power, the population, the growth of naval military power of China in relation to Russia. However, there is a lot of reasons for rather deep alignment between these powers, geopolitical and geoeconomic. For Putin, demonstrating that it can get its sphere of influence in East Central Europe, for China, that it can have its sphere of influence in the Pacific, and that the United States doesn't have the power or the capacity to influence those mutual interests. And then, of course, gas pipelines and energy trade for economic cooperation.
And I understand that China has increased trade and has taken over businesses in Russia that Western companies abandoned due to the sanctions and, of course, Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. And are there any hidden strings here that Russia might face in this growing economic dependence, if you will, on China?
Well, I am sure that aside from the beautiful settings for the summit and the smiles and handshakes of the leaders, there are tough issues always that are discussed. I always recall how Russian analysts would complain that the Chinese are driving very hard bargains in negotiations, including, for example, on energy and long-term energy prices. And so there are always these kinds of tensions. Let's not forget that the kind of interactions we see is in some ways more of alignment than in alliance. It's based on hardcore national interests, and it doesn't have the same kind of fundamental underpinnings of, say, community sense like the EU. It doesn't have subsidiarity, it doesn't have pooled sovereignty elements to it. Yeah. It's in some ways very transactional.
Yeah, and if there's a lack of shared values here, I wonder then, what does this new multipolar world order that's being pushed by China with Russia, India, Iran, and others, what does it mean then for the United States?
Well, in the United States, I am discerning two strands of thinking, of views on these kinds of developments. There is a more traditional view that sees the need to counterbalance and contain China and adopt tougher measures, including, for example, enhanced military presence in the Indo-Pacific and building up naval capabilities. We actually see some of those measures being undertaken under the Trump administration. On the other hand, we have seen some shifts, including Trump rhetoric, talking about the fact that actually Xi Jinping is potentially a good leader and cooperation might be good with him. So it's almost like the idea of rather than fighting this alliance, dividing spheres of influence around the world and acting accordingly.
Professor Alexseev, it's good talking with you. Fascinating discussion. We appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And we want to get more now with Brad Bowman. He's the Senior Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies Center on Military and Political Power. He's also an expert on U.S. defense strategy and policy, a familiar face to our viewers. Brad, good to see you. What are President Trump and his administration thinking right now when they see these images of President Xi and Putin sharing tea together and seemingly strengthening their relationship?
I think President Trump, and for that matter, all Americans and our allies, should be deeply concerned. Sometimes when we see events like this, there's a tendency in some circles to dismiss it as performative, that this is just a photo op, if you will. It's some people getting together to try to scare us. But here at our Foundation for Defense of Democracies, we've been doing more than 12 to 14 months of research on what we've been calling the axis of aggressors, this cooperation between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, heads of states for whom all of which will be at this parade this week. And we've documented just within our center alone 5 categories of security cooperation and more than 600 instances of cooperation since 2019. And this isn't just like 2 naval ships sailing next to one another. This is cooperation related to weapons development, weapons proliferation, building the capability, capacity, readiness, and resilience of each of their military forces, making them more capable in their existing spheres of aggression, like Ukraine, and potential spheres of aggression, like Taiwan or the Korean Peninsula. And that creates problems in each of those areas, but also more broadly, because for so long, the United States has hoped that our adversaries will not present us with 2 major combat operations at the same time. So it really calls into question longstanding fundamental details here and questions here in Washington, like how much do we need to spend on defense? What kind of military we need? And if we have our leading adversaries cooperating in this manner, strategic coordination and building their military capacity and their economic integration, that presents a serious problem as arguably one of the preeminent features of the geostrategic environment we confront, and why it is the most dangerous geostrategic environment I think we've seen since 1945.
And Brad, if we agree that this multipolar world that Xi Jinping has talked about, if that is indeed forming before our very eyes, how likely is it then that the conditions will be just right for the United States military to be faced with a 2-front war? I mean, that has been the nightmare scenario in the Pentagon, right?
It has, and I've been warning about this for years. And, you know, at the unclassified level, one can assume that we're not prepared for such a contingency because our Air Force is not large enough. Our Navy is not large enough. China has a larger Navy than we do. For years, the size of our attack submarine fleet has been shrinking, not to mention our ability to maintain those submarines and build new ones. We have real problems. And the primary problem is, for too long, the United States, and dare I say our friends in Europe, have been acting like it's 1991 and not 2025. And now we're paying for that, and we're having to pay catch up. We're awake now. We're moving the right direction. But I don't think we're fully awake, and I don't think we're moving quickly enough. You know, hopefully conflict that we're talking about won't come soon. But that's the thing that history teaches us, that we need to be humble about our predictions. And where I come from, worst case scenario assumptions are good to assume, because if the worst happens, you'll be better prepared if you're sprinting rather than slumbering or walking when you should be sprinting.
President Trump's America First policies have certainly strained Western alliances, particularly his trade tariffs. I'm wondering, have they done the opposite when it comes to this so-called axis of upheaval? Is it actually making this axis stronger?
You know, I think what we're confronting, I don't think I know, what we're confronting is a global competition. And competition is not quite the right word, because it makes us think of a softball or football game, and the stakes are much higher than that. But, you know, this is playing out, of course, in Eastern Europe, of course, in the Middle East with Iran, and of course, in the Korean Peninsula and the Taiwan Strait, but elsewhere as well. It's happening in South America. It's happening in Africa. And if we're decimating America's ability to do foreign assistance and entities like the U.S. Agency for International Development, then in some level, we're just ceding the field of competition and creating a vacuum that our adversaries are going to step into. And I'll end with this, is that what I think is on display this week, both with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting and also with this parade, is that our adversaries understand the value of partners. So when the bullies are getting together to make each of them more effective and more effective collectively, it's not a good time for Americans, Europeans, to be taking our partnership, our alliance for granted, because I think as Americans, we need our NATO allies more than ever, and dare I say, Europeans need America more than ever. This is a time for unity with allies, not dismissing them or taking from their granted, and that needs to be more than just, you know, cocktail parties in Brussels or Davos. It means hardcore economic, military cooperation to secure our common interests. And when they talk about multipolar, let's be clear what they're talking about. They're basically saying, get out of our way so we can dominate our neighbors. This is the opposite of the rule of law that Europe now stands for, and we should be clear on that.
And doesn't this also speak, though, to the strength of Western alliances? I'm thinking of the European Union, I'm thinking of NATO. These are alliances that are based on shared values. The picture of the future that President Xi is presenting, these are transactional alliances, aren't they? They don't really share values, they just maybe share interests at this time.
It's a great question. I would respectfully push back on two premises in your question there. One is that they don't share values. I think they do share values. They absolutely share values. These are the values of subjects versus citizens. Our value is that we like citizenship, and I'm borrowing from Kurt Volker here. They want to make subjects. Vladimir Putin wants subjects in Ukraine. Xi Jinping wants subjects in Taiwan. We want citizens. And that's kind of a shorthand way of saying that this is fundamentally an alliance of antithetical values where might makes right, authoritarianism and autocracy is put above the rule of law and consent of the governed. If that's not values-based, I don't know what it is. And a quick word on your transactional comment. Transactional, at least where I come from, implies that it's fleeting or not of much importance. Yes, some of this, hey, you give me this, I'll give you that, a quid pro quo type thing. But if you talk about the Russians transferring submarine quieting technology to China based on their decades of confronting us in the undersea domain, that's going to dramatically shift the balance of power and give China submarine capabilities that may lead them to believe that they could accomplish their objectives in the Taiwan Strait because they could defeat the U.S. Navy there. That is not merely transactional. That is Russia saying we're going to degrade our comparative advantage based on shared values with Beijing so that we can help Beijing create mischief in the Indo-Pacific so we can create more mischief in Europe.
Okay. Brad, I want to ask you one question before we run out of time. Something completely different. We're reporting this evening on the naval buildup off the coast of Venezuela, the U.S. Navy buildup off the coast of Venezuela. How concerned are you that President Trump may give orders at the Pentagon for the military to oust Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro? Regime change.
My concern is that our adversaries are doing things in Latin America, especially China, but also Russia and Iran, for years, and we have lacked the capacity to do much about it in the military domain. So I support this administration's desire to pay better attention to what's happening in the Western Hemisphere, in our neighborhood, if you will. But there's a right way and a wrong way to go about it. We should have military power that we can put forward there, but we have to do it prudently. And my goodness, we have to be careful about starting new conflicts because we have our hands full in Europe, in the Middle East, and the Pacific.
Bradley Bowman with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. As always, Brad, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.